Great to be here. Thank you. Thank you all for coming out. I'm going to talk this evening about Thank You for Being Late, the updated version. I know some of you may have been here a year ago when I was in conversation with Giddy Greenstein. But I hope to give you the sort of full rounded view and have time afterwards for questions, and then they'll be selling the book after, and I'm happy to sign it. Thank you for being late. First question I always get from people is, where from comes the title? Thank you for being late. It actually comes from meeting people in Washington, D.C., where I live, for breakfast. And I eat breakfast downtown in New York. I work out of the New York Times office in Washington, and I don't like to eat alone when I'm downtown for work. I like to be able to learn from someone, so I do a lot of business breakfasts, and every once in a while someone comes 10, 15 minutes late. And they say, Tom, I'm really sorry. Is the weather, the traffic, the subway, the dog ate my homework? And one day, about 3.5 years ago now, when I started this, my friend Peter Corcel came 15 minutes late and did the usual, Tom, I'm really sorry. The weather, the traffic, the subway, the dog ate my homework. And I just spontaneously said to him, actually, Peter, thank you for being late. Because you were late, I've been eavesdropping on their conversation. Fascinating. I've been people watching the lobby. Fantastic. And best of all, I just connected two ideas I've been struggling with for a month. So thank you for being late. Well, people started to get into it. They'd say, well, you're welcome. Because they understood I was actually giving them permission to pause, to slow down. In fact, my favorite quote from the front of the book is from my teacher and friend Dov Seidman, who says, when you press the pause button on a computer, it stops. But when you press the pause button on a human being, it starts. That's when it starts to reflect, rethink, and reimagine. And boy, don't we need to be doing a lot of that right now? So this book, thank you. This book actually was triggered when I paused and engaged with someone I wouldn't normally engage with. So as I said, I actually live in Bethesda, Maryland, and I actually take the subway to work about once a week or so. That involves me driving from our home in Bethesda to downtown Bethesda. I park in the public parking garage beneath the Bethesda Hyatt, and I take the red line into DC. And I did this now 3.5 years ago. Parked my car in the garage, got my timestamp ticket, took the red line in, spent my day at the New York Times office near the White House, took the red line back, got my car, timestamp ticket, cashier's booth, handed my ticket to the cashier. He looked at it and looked at me and said, I know who you are. I said, great. He said, I read your column. I said, great, parking guy reads my column. He said, I don't always agree. I thought, get me out of here. But actually, I said, that's good. If you don't always agree, it means you always have to check. And I drove off thinking, it's great, the parking guy reads my column. Anyways, a week went by. I took my weekly trip into DC, parking garage, timestamp ticket, red line, office, day, red line back, car, timestamp ticket, cashier's booth, same guy's there. This time he says, Mr. Friedman, I have my own blog. Would you read my blog? I thought, oh my God, the parking guy is now my competitor? What just happened? So I said, well, look, well, write it down for me and I'll look it up. So he tore off a piece of receipt paper and he wrote on it, odanambi.com. I got home, I called it up on my computer. Turns out he's Ethiopian, writes about Ethiopian politics from the perspective of the Oromo people. It was a little rough, but it wasn't bad. Anyways, I told my wife Ann about it. I thought about him for a couple days, and I eventually decided that this was a sign from God, that I should pause and engage this guy. The problem was I actually didn't have his email, so the only way I could do it was park in the parking garage every day, which I did for 4 or 5 days. I don't remember anymore how long it took. But I got there at 7 a.m. one morning. I actually stopped under the gate so it couldn't come down. I got out of my car. I said to him, Ayile, now I know his name, Ayile Bojir. I said, Ayile, I want your email. I would like to send you a message. And that night, I began an email exchange with him. I saved them, so they're in the front of the book. It was kind of funny. But I basically said to him, I have a proposition for you. I will teach you how to write a column in the New York Times if you will tell me your life story. And he basically said, I see you're proposing a deal. I like this deal. Okay. So we agreed to meet near his office at Pete's Coffee House in Bethesda 2 weeks later. And I came with a 6-page memo on how to write a column for the New York Times. And he came with his life story. He was an economics grad of Haile Selassie University in Addis Ababa. Became a political activist on behalf of the Oromo people and on behalf of democracy and pluralism in Ethiopia. The authoritarian regime there threw him out of the country. We welcomed him here as a political exile. Yes, we used to do that. Okay, and he basically worked in the parking garage to support his effort to blog about the future of his country. His Google metrics say he's read in 30 different countries. It's my parking guy. And it's a wonderful story and a wonderful example of how anyone today can participate in the global conversation. Well, I then explained to him how to write a column. And I explained to him that a news story is meant to inform. I could write a news story about this event tonight, and Susan would tell me whether I inform better or worse. But a column, an opinion piece, what I do, is actually meant to provoke. It's meant to produce a reaction. So I'm either in the heating business or the lighting business. That's what I do. I'm either doing a heating or a lighting. I'm either stoking up an emotion in you, or I'm illuminating something for you. If I really do it well, I do both and produce heat and light in order to get this reaction. But to produce heat and light, I explained to Ayile, actually requires a chemical reaction, and you have to combine 3 compounds. The first is, what is your value set? What are the set of values, the basis of the opinions that you're trying to push in the world? Are you a communist, a capitalist, a neocon, a neoliberal, a libertarian, a Marxist, a Keynesian? What are the values you're pushing? Second, how do you think the machine works? So the machine is my shorthand for what are the biggest forces shaping more things in more places, in more ways, on more days. As a columnist, I'm always carrying around in my head a working hypothesis about how the big gears and pulleys of the world work, because I'm trying to take my values and push that machine, and if I don't know how it works, I either won't push it or I'll push it in the wrong direction. So I'm always thinking about that. And lastly, what have you learned about people and culture? Because there's no column without people, and there are no people without culture. How does the machine affect different people and culture, and how do they come back and affect the machine? Stir those 3 together, let it rise, bake for 45 minutes, and if you do it right, you too will produce a column that produces heat and light for the New York Times. Well, the more I went through this with Ayile, and I'd never put it together like this until I did it for him, the more I started to think, well, if that's what a column is about, what's my value set? What have I been pushing out there? Those of you who read me know I'm not quite a liberal. I'm certainly not a conservative. And that's because my values actually emerged from the small town in Minnesota, where I grew up in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, in a time and place where politics worked. And that is what's had the biggest effect on me and my writing. Not a philosopher, not any particular book. It's actually the time and place where I grew up. How do I think the machine works today? And what have I learned about people and culture all these years? And that was the book I decided to write. And that's what Thank You for Being Late is all about. The first part is about how the machine works today. And the second part is about how this machine is not just changing your world, it is reshaping your world. And it's reshaping 5 realms. It's reshaping politics, geopolitics, ethics, community, and the workplace. So how do I think the machine works today? Well, I think that what is shaping more things in more places, in more ways, on more days, is that we are in the middle of 3 nonlinear accelerations, all at the same time, with the 3 largest forces on the planet, which I call the market, Mother Nature, and Moore's Law. So Mother Nature for me is climate change, biodiversity loss, and population growth, particularly in the developing world. If you put all of them on a graph, they actually look like a hockey stick. They look like Glacier National Park 1913, Glacier National Park 2012. They look like let me go back. Went too fast there. They look like Lake Chad 1963, Lake Chad 2001. By the way, Lake Chad 2017 is a fraction of that. Our 4 soldiers who were killed in Niger, it was near Lake Chad, and that's because there's a huge scramble for resources there. It looks like this graph. This is a graph of global average temperature. That's a hockey stick. Or it looks like this graph. This is reported instances of extreme weather since 1988, another hockey stick. And then, of course, the mother of all hockey sticks, which is population growth. It so spikes in the last few years that it is literally a hockey stick. The second acceleration is in the market. That, for me, is globalization, but not your grandfather's globalization. That was containers on ships and planes. That's actually flat to going down. What is actually driving the world from interconnected to interdependent and accelerating globalization is digital globalization. The way everything today is being digitized and globalized through Amazon or Facebook or PayPal or MOOCs. Put that on a graph, and it looks like that in total data consumed per month. Or it looks like this, which is mobile cellular subscriptions just in the US, but the global graph looks the same. Another hockey stick. And lastly, Moore's Law, coined by Gordon Moore in 1965, the co-founder of Intel, another hockey stick, posited that the speed and power of microchips would double roughly every 24 months. Now it's about 30 months, but never mind. Moore's Law, which was coined in 1965 by Gordon Moore, say the co-founder of Intel, in an article in Electronics magazine, Moore's Law has held up for 52 years. Now, every year for the last 52 years, someone has written an article saying, Moore's Law is over, Moore's Law is over. It's run up against its limits. And what all those authors have in common is they were all wrong. Moore's Law is alive and well, and it's another hockey stick. This computer running this PowerPoint, I suspect, is running on an Intel 14 nanometer chip. It has 37.5 million transistors per square millimeter. So your eye cannot see it. Under Moore's Law, right about now, at the end of 2017, Intel will begin shipping its 10 nanometer chip, and it has 100 million transistors per square millimeter. So if you think the world is fast today, just wait till the end of the year. Now, what's the difference? Because it's very hard for the human mind to grasp the power of such an exponential. What's the difference between a 14 nanometer chip and a 10 nanometer chip? The difference is a self-driving car that needs the whole trunk of the car to contain the brains of that car, and a self-driving car that will just need a little box under the front seat. Andy McAfee and Eric Brynjolfsson, in their book, The Second Machine Age, like to tell the story to explain the power of an exponential. A story often told in Silicon Valley these days of the man who invented the game of chess. And he gave the game to the king. The king loved it. He said, "How can I reward you, good sir?" And the man said, "Your Highness, I just want to feed my family." "How would you like to do that?" the king said. He said, "I would just like you to take, Your Highness, 1 kernel of rice, put it on the first square of this chessboard, 2 on the second, 4 on the next, 8 on the next, 16 on the next, 32 on the next. Just keep doubling it. My family will be fine." The king said, "It shall be done," not realizing that when you double something just 63 times, the number you get is roughly 18 quintillion, which was probably more rice than existed on the planet. As Andy and Eric point out, we just entered the second half of the chessboard, where the doubling of Moore's Law starts to get really big, and you start to see some really funky stuff. You start to see cars that can drive themselves and computers that can beat humans in any game, including chess, Jeopardy, and Go. Intel wants to explain the power of this doubling. Once took a 1971 Volkswagen Beetle, and they said, what if this Beetle improved at the same rate of Moore's Law? And they estimated if it had today, that VW Beetle, that 1971 Beetle, would go 300,000 miles an hour. It would get 2 million miles per gallon, and it would cost 4 cents. You would be able to drive it your entire life on 1 tank of gas. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the power of the Moore's Law exponential that is driving all of technology today. And what's really going on is these 3 accelerations in the market, Mother Nature, and Moore's Law, they're all interacting with each other. More Moore's Law drives more globalization drives more climate change, and more solutions. And they're all swirling about, and they aren't just changing your world, they are reshaping your world. So I'm not going to talk about the Mother Nature one. I think you understand that. I'm not going to talk about the market one. I'm going to go a little deeper and talk about the Moore's Law one, because it's really the Uber driver of everything. My chapter on Moore's Law is called What the Hell Happened in 2007? What the hell happened in 2007? Now I know what you're thinking, 2007, what's this guy talking about? Such an innocuous year. Well, here's what happened in 2007. The year was kicked off at the Moscone Center in San Francisco when in January 2007, Steve Jobs introduced the first one of these babies, the first iPhone, beginning a process which we're about halfway through now of putting one of these babies in the hands of every person on the planet. This thing, it's actually a handheld computer with more compute power in it than the Apollo space mission had, and it doubles as a phone and a camera. That's how the year kicked off. In 2007, a company called Facebook opened its platform to anyone with a registered email address. In other words, it broke out of high schools and universities where it had been confined and was made available to anyone, anywhere with a registered email address. And in 2007, Facebook went global. In 2007, a company called Twitter split off on its own independent platform and went global. In 2007, the most important software you've never heard of, probably called Hadoop, named after the founder's son's toy elephant, was launched into the wild. Hadoop is what enables 1 million computers to work together as if they're one. I think that's called big data. Hadoop actually didn't invent those algorithms. They were invented by Google. They're called GFS and MapReduce, but as Doug Cutting, the founder of Hadoop, explains in the book, Google lives in the future and sends us letters back home. And what Google did was leave a trail of breadcrumbs for its big data algorithm that the open source community was able to reverse engineer and create a free public version called Hadoop. And every one of you are in business today. Your systems, you can bet, are probably running on it. In 2007, the second most important software you've never heard of, called Vmware, went public. Vmware is what enables any operating system to work on any computer. We forget what a revolution that was in 2007, and it is the foundation of cloud computing. In 2007, the third most important software you've never heard of, called Github, opened its doors. Github today is the largest library of open source software with over 15 million users. Again, virtually every company is drawing on GitHub today. In 2007, that company called Google bought a little-known TV company called YouTube. And in 2007, Google launched into the wild its own operating system called Android. In 2007, a guy up in Seattle named Jeff Bezos launched the world's first ebook reader. It was called the Kindle. And in 2007, IBM launched the world's first cognitive computer. It was called Watson. In 2007, 3 design students in San Francisco were attending the design conference that year, and one of them noticed that all of the hotel rooms were sold out. But one of them happened to have 3 spare air mattresses. And they thought it might be cool if they rented out these air mattresses to people who couldn't get hotel rooms, and it worked out so well. In 2007, they started a company called Airbnb. That's why it's called Airbnb, because of the founding 3 air mattresses. Here's what else happened in 2007. This is a graph of the cost of sequencing a human genome. In 2001, it was $100 million. It falls to $10 million in around 2003. And then you'll notice it goes over a cliff like an EKG heading for a heart attack, basically, down to around $100,000 in 2007. This is a graph of solar power. Solar energy takes off in 2007, as does the process for extracting natural gas from tight shale called fracking. Between 2006 and 2008, America's total natural gas reserves because of fracking increased by 35% in 18 months. That was a staggering number. In 2007, get the next cloud up. This is a picture of what social networks look like on a graph. So that white line going down, like another EKG heading for a heart attack, that's actually the cost of generating a megabit of data. And you notice it goes straight down in 2007. The blue line is the speed of transmitting that data, and the two lines cross in 2008, close enough for government work. Oh yeah, I always forget. This is a graph of cloud computing. You'll notice the first year data show up is 2008, which means the cloud was born in 2007. In 2007, the internet crossed, late 2006, actually, the internet crossed 1 billion users for the first time, seems to have been a tipping point. In 2007, Intel, for the first time, went off silicon to extend Moore's law. It introduced non-silicon materials into its microchips. In 2005, Michael Dell, the founder of Dell Computers, retired. And in 2007, he decided he better come back to work. Turns out, friends, 2007 may be understood in time as one of the greatest technological inflection points since Gutenberg. And we completely missed it. Why? Because of 2008. Yeah, right when our physical technologies just took off, like we were on a moving sidewalk in the airport that suddenly went from 5 to 50 miles an hour, right when that happened, our social technologies, all the management adaptation, the regulatory adaptation, the legal adaptation, the political adaptation, and the learning adaptation you'd want to go with that, completely froze because we entered the deepest recession since 1929. And in that split between our physical technologies accelerating and everything else freezing, a lot of people were dislocated, and a lot of Trump and Brexit voters were born. You know, someone was alive when Gutenberg invented the printing press. And you can bet, when that happened, and that printing press showed up for the first time, some monk said to some priest, "Now that is really cool, okay? That is really cool. I mean, I don't have to write these Bibles out longhand anymore. We can just stamp them out." Someone was alive then. You are alive at a similar inflection point. So what actually happened in 2007? Well, I think what happened is your computer basically has 5 key parts. It's got that Moore's Law microchip power processor. It's got a storage chip. It's got networking. It's got software. And it's got a sensor. It's got a camera. And what I do in the book is trace how all 5 were actually into Moore's Law. And I think they all came together in 2007. They all melded together into this thing, we call the cloud. The cloud. But I never use the term the cloud in my book because it sounds so fluffy, so soft, so cuddly. Sounds like a Joni Mitchell song. I've looked at clouds from both sides. This ain't no cloud, folks. This is what I call in the book a supernova. The science students among you will know the supernova is the largest force in nature. It's the explosion of a star. Because I think what happened in 2007 was a release of energy into the hands of men, women, and machines, the likes of which we have never seen before. And it changed 4 kinds of power overnight. It changed the power of one. What one person can do today as a maker or a breaker is unlike anything we have ever seen before. We have a president who can sit in his pajamas in the East Wing of the White House and tweet now directly to 1 billion people without an editor, a libel lawyer, or a filter, okay? Or a brain, but I'm not going there. So, but here's what's really scary. The head of ISIS can do the exact same thing from his bunker in Raqqa province in Syria. The power of one today to be a maker or a breaker has been amplified beyond anything we've ever seen before. The power of machines have changed. Machines now have all 5 senses, or they're acquiring them. We've never lived in a world where machines have all 5 senses. That's challenging what it means to be human. Again, Dov Seidman says, Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. But what am I when machines can think better than me? Now, we crossed that line for the first time on, of all places, a game show. February 14th, 2011, there were 3 contestants. 2 were the all-time Jeopardy champions. The third simply went by his last name, Mr. Watson. Mr. Watson passed on the first question, but he buzzed in before the 2 humans on the second question. See if you can get it. The question was, it's worn on the foot of a horse and used by a dealer in a casino. And in under 2.5 seconds, Mr. Watson said in perfect Jeopardy style, what is a shoe? What is a shoe? And for the first time, we watched a cognitive computer solve a pun riddle faster than 2 human beings. And the world kind of hasn't been the same since. It's changed the power of flows. Ideas now flow and change and melt and congeal and fracture faster than we have ever seen before. Where did you want to build your town in the Middle Ages? You wanted to build it on a river, because the flow of that river brought you transportation, brought you ideas, brought you food, brought you people, brought you energy. You wanted to build your town on the Amazon. Where do you want to build your town today? On Amazon.com, okay? You want to build it on the digital flows, because they're what will bring you now ideas and energy and people and innovation. And lastly, it's changed the power of many. Because what these flows are doing, by empowering men, women, and machines, and amplifying them so much, they've made us the biggest forcing function on and in nature, which is why the new geophysical era is being named for us. The new climate era is called the Anthropocene. Now, these 4 changes in power, they're not just changing your world. They are reshaping your world. They are reshaping 5 realms: politics, geopolitics, ethics, the workplace, and community. And all of them now have to adapt. And that's what we're in the middle of. So let me talk a little bit about what I mean by that reshaping and the challenge. Excuse me, beginning with the workplace. Before I do, though, I just want to show you a graph. This graph, it's a very just crude rendering. It was drawn for me by Astro Teller, who runs Google X, Google's research arm. Astro is chief astronaut there. And Astro is a friend of mine, and I went out to see him to tell him about the book idea. And he listened to me for a while, and then he got up and he got 3 magic markers out. And he went over to his whiteboard and he drew this graph. The blue line across the middle, he said, that's the average rate at which human beings and societies adapt to change over time. So you'll notice the line has a positive slope, but it's very gradual. Then he drew that white line there. The white line is technology. So over here at the left end of the line, you notice it's very flat. That's because between the 11th century and the 12th century, your bow and arrow did not get better. There was no bow and arrow 2.0 between the 11th century and the 12th century, okay? But then we got the scientific revolution and Copernicus and Galileo, and then eventually Steve Jobs and Intel and Bill Gates, and the line starts to go due north, and then Astro drew that little diamond there. And I said, what's that, Astro? He said, that's where we are. We're at a place now where technology is simply evolving faster than the average human being in society can adapt to. And therefore, then he got out his 3rd magic marker, and he drew that little dotted line there. And I said, what's that, Astro? He said, that's learning faster and governing smarter. And that is the challenge of every parent, every educator, and every governing official today. How do we lift the adaptation line to meet technology where it's going in the age of acceleration. So my chapter on how the workplace is being reshaped is called, How Do We Turn AI into IA? How do we turn artificial intelligence into intelligent assistance, ANCE, intelligent assistance, ANTS, and intelligent algorithms so more people can learn faster and govern smarter? Because this graph is where we're going. The blue line at the top, that's the number of non-farm US workers who work with their minds. And the white line at the bottom is the number who work with their hands. So what do I mean by intelligent assistance, and intelligent algorithms? Let me give you an example of each one. My example of intelligent assistance is the Human Resources Department at AT&T, a company I spent a lot of time with working on the book. Giant telecom, living right next to the supernova, competing against the biggest telecoms in the world. 330,000 employees. Pretty good chance whatever's going on at AT&T, Human Resources Department, is coming to a neighborhood near you. So what's going on there? Well, basically, AT&T starts its year with its CEO, Randall Stephenson, giving a pretty radically transparent speech about where the company's going, what businesses they're going to be in, and what skills you're going to need to be a rising employee at AT&T that year. He gives it to the top management, they filter down to middle management, then down lower, and over the next 6 months, it sort of works its way through the company. Then they put all of their managers, 110,000 people, on their own in-house LinkedIn system. So I'm in there, Tom Friedman, it shows my academic work, the work I've done at AT&T, what learning I've done. And then they've determined that there are, I'm making up the number, but roughly 10 skill sets you need to be a rising employee at AT&T. And it turns out, as they look at my CV, I've actually got 7, but I'm missing 3. Then they went out and partnered with Sebastian Thrun from Udacity, the online learning university, and he created nano degrees for all 10 skill sets. Then they came back to me and said, Tom, here's the deal. We will give you up to $8,000 a year to take the nano degree courses for the skill sets you're missing, $30,000 over your life and your career here at AT&T. Just one condition, Tom. You have to take these courses at home and on weekends on your own time, not on company time. Now, if I say, you know what, Mr. AT&T, I've actually climbed up one too many telephone poles, I'm not into this anymore, they now have a wonderful severance package for me. But I will not be working there likely much longer. Their deal with me is if I take those courses, they will give me first crack at all the new jobs. About 10,000 employees wash out there every year. About 30,000 employees take the courses and are elevated from inside the company, and they go outside every year for about another 30,000. If I do those courses, their social contract with me is very simple. Tom, you can be a lifelong employee at AT&T, but only if you're a lifelong learner. If you are not ready to be a lifelong learner, you can no longer be a lifelong employee at AT&T. And that, friends, is the social contract coming to a neighborhood near you. And that is why my teacher and friend Heather McGowan likes to say, Tom, never ask your kid anymore what you want to be when you grow up. Because whatever it is, it's going to be gone unless it's policeman or fireman. Only ask your kid today how you want to be when you grow up. Will you have an agile learning mindset? Will you be predisposed to be a lifelong learner long after you've left home and mom and dad are not there to say, Tommy, have you done your homework? Because the days when you can get a 4-year degree and then expect to dine out on that for 30 years is so 1950s, okay? Because what you learn now in your first year could well be outdated in your 4th year. When Google invented TensorFlow, which is the machine learning language for programming, Udacity had a course up on it in 30 days. How many universities do you think had a course up on TensorFlow in 30 days? And that leads to another real challenge, which I think is one of the things really roiling our society today, but you don't see it. And it's something I learned from Marina Gorbis from the Institute of the Future. Marina likes to say, 15 years ago, everyone was talking about the digital divide. I'm sure when I came to the stage and spoke about the world is flat, we talked about the digital divide. New York City has internet, upstate New York doesn't. America has internet, Central Africa doesn't. There was a digital divide, and there still is somewhat, but basically, the digital divide is on the way out. I don't know if it's 3 years, 5 years, but we are heading to a world where virtually anyone who wants to be connected will be connected. There will be no digital divide. And in that world, says Marina, the really relevant divide will be the self-motivation divide. Who has the self-motivation to be a lifelong learner in a world where everything is going to be available on the internet? Whoever has the self-motivation to do that. Unfortunately, a lot of people in our country like actually to be told what to do. And in fact, they built our country. We owe these people a huge debt. We told them what to do, and they did it well, and they did it with pride. Unfortunately, today, just doing what you're told is not going to cut it anymore if you want to be in the middle class. And that has a lot of people freaked out. My example of digital assistant, intelligent assistant, IA, is the maintenance staff, the janitorial staff at Qualcomm. Qualcomm's another company I spent a lot of time with. They actually made the inside of your iPhone. They made most of the chips and software in your iPhone. They weren't made by Apple. That's why Apple's always suing Qualcomm over patents, if you follow the business pages. Anyways, Qualcomm has a 64-building campus out in San Diego, and 3 years ago they took 6 buildings and they affixed sensors everywhere. To every light, door, heating, cooling system, water pipe, faucet, drain, computer, they put a sensor on it. And they beam all that data up to the cloud, up to the supernova, and then they beamed it down onto an iPad with an incredibly user-friendly interface for their janitors. So if I leave my computer on or a pipe bursts above my head, the janitors know it before I do. And they swipe down and either know who to call or how to fix it themselves. Qualcomm turned their janitors into maintenance technologists. Their janitors now give tours to foreign visitors. What do you think that does for the dignity of a janitor? Because he or she now has an intelligent assistant enabling them to learn faster and operate smarter. My example of intelligent algorithm is the partnership between the College Board that administers the PSAT and SAT exams and Khan Academy, the online learning platform. We all know in 11th grade, we have to take the PSAT, the practice SAT exam, to get us ready for the SAT exam to see if we can get into the college of our choice. The tests, as you know, they measure your verbal and your math skills and writing. What many parents do is in 11th grade, they go out and hire a tutor for $200 an hour to goose their kids' math and verbal scores. It's okay, we all did it, don't feel guilty, but it was a completely rigged game because a lot of people could not afford to hire a tutor for $200 an hour to improve their kids' math and verbal scores on the SAT exams. So 3 years ago, the College Board and Khan Academy partnered and created an intelligent algorithm for free PSAT and SAT prep. The way it works is I take the PSAT in 11th grade, I get the results back, they say, Tom, you did really well in verbal, you could be a journalist, but you have a problem with math. Specifically, you have a problem with fractions and right angles. My exact weakness. Then takes me to a practice site just for fractions and right angles. Just for my specific weakness. If I do well there, it takes me to another site that says, Tom, you could be in AP Math. Me? In AP Math? No one in my neighborhood was ever in AP Math. No one in my family was in AP Math. I didn't even know that, no, you could be in AP Math. If I do well there, it takes me to another site with over 180 college scholarship opportunities today. Last year, 3 million American kids got free PSAT and SAT prep on this intelligent algorithm. Another intelligent algorithm that I really enjoy is opportunity at work. We have about 32 million Americans who start college but don't finish. Some go 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 3.5 years, and drop out. They go to apply for a job to you or anybody else, and you say, where's your BA? No BA, sorry, no job. A huge waste of human talent in our society. So several algorithms, Merge Opportunity at Work is one of my favorite, where you can actually go to them now If you can show them what you can do, they will bring the job to you. So they actually badge you, they measure your knowledge from whatever you did in college, and then they partner with companies to slot you in, companies who really don't care about your pedigree, but only care if you can do the job. So I profiled a young African-American woman, LaShawna Lewis, who went to Michigan Tech for 3.5 years in a computer science program, had dropped out for family reasons after 3.5 years. She went to apply for jobs. No one would hire her without a BA. She ended up driving a school bus to and from a computer school, couldn't make that up, and working on the help desk at a law firm, helping lawyers rediscover their lost passwords. She got connected with Opportunity at Work, or one like it. They partnered with MasterCard. They slotted her in as a systems engineer at MasterCard. Today, she is a senior systems engineer at MasterCard, and as she says in the last line of her interview in my book, and Mr. Friedman, I still don't have my BA. That is an intelligent algorithm. Now I'm gonna make you all a bet. I will bet none of you have heard of any of this. And that's because you were following our last election, where Bernie Sanders' big idea to help workers was to tear down the world's 7 biggest banks. Donald Trump's big idea was to tear down Hillary Clinton. And Hillary Clinton's big idea was to direct you to her website, www.hillaryclinton.com. The fact is, there is massive innovation going on in our country on the pathway of education to work, and nobody is telling anybody. In fact, there's so much going on, I almost thought of writing my book just about this. In fact, there is so much going on, I will tell you, nothing has to be invented. Whatever you can think of, someone today, I can show you a community that's already doing it. And it is a huge failure of our politics that these things are not at the center of our political discussion today, which is a good segue to how the world of politics is being reshaped by these 3 accelerating forces. So my chapter on that is called Mother Nature's Political Party. And that's because I think we're actually in the middle of 3 climate changes at once. We're in the middle of change of the climate of the climate. We're in the middle of change of the climate of globalization. The world's going from interconnected to interdependent. And we're in the middle of a change of the climate of technology. Every company today can analyze, optimize, prophesize, customize, and digitize/automatize any job, product, or service. That is a climate change. So as I thought about that, I thought, what do you want when the climate changes? You want 2 things. You want resilience. You need to be able to take a blow, because stuff happens when the climate changes. You get disruptions. But you also want propulsion. You want to be able to move ahead. You don't want to be curled up in a ball under your bed waiting for the climate to change, to stop. So then I thought about, well, who do I talk to? Who do I interview about how you get resilience and propulsion when the climate changes? And then I realized I knew a woman. She was 3.8 billion years old. Her name was Mother Nature, and she dealt with more climate changes than anybody. So I made an appointment, went out to see her. And I sat down and I said, Mother Nature, how do you produce resilience and propulsion when the climate changes? And she said, well, Tom, first of all, I got to tell you, everything I do, she said, I do unconsciously, but these are my strategies, okay? First, she said, I'm incredibly adaptive. In my world, it's not the strongest who survive, not the smartest, it's the most adaptive. I'm incredibly adaptive. Second, she said, and I'm adaptive in a rather brutal way, it's a process I call natural selection. Secondly, she said, I am incredibly entrepreneurial. So wherever I see a blank space in nature, I fill it with a plant or animal perfectly adapted to that niche. I'm incredibly entrepreneurial. Third, she said, I'm incredibly pluralistic. Oh my God, I'm the most diverse person you've ever met. I try 20 different species of everything, see who wins. I love diversity. I am so pluralistic. In fact, I noticed, she told me, that my most diverse ecosystems are my most resilient and propulsive ecosystems. I'm incredibly pluralistic. Fourth, she said, I'm incredibly sustainable. Nothing is wasted. In my world, everything is food. Eat food, poop seed. Eat food, poop seed. Nothing is wasted in my world. Fifth, she said, I'm incredibly hybrid and heterodox. Nothing dogmatic about me. I'm really pragmatic. I'll mix all kinds of things together. Different trees with different soils, different bees with different flowers. I'm incredibly hybrid in my thinking and heterodox. And lastly, she said, Tom, I do believe in the laws of bankruptcy. I kill all my failures, I return them to the great manufacturer in the sky, and I take their energy to nourish my successes. Well, my theory is the community, the company, the country that most closely mirrors Mother Nature's killer apps will be the ones who thrive in the age of acceleration. And since it was an election year I was writing in, 2016, I invented in the book Mother Nature's political party. I imagined, what if Mother Nature had been running against Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump? What would her platform look like? And I created Mother Nature's 18-point platform, and I added a few for the paperback, which of course is just a proxy for my own politics. I won't go into the platform, but suffice it to say, on some issues, I'm really out there on the left with Bernie Sanders. I believe we should have universal health care. I think you've got to strengthen our safety nets and trampolines because this world is going to be too damn fast for more people. We need to strengthen our safety nets and trampolines to make everybody mobile. But at the same time, I'm actually to the right of the Wall Street Journal editorial page, because I would abolish all corporate taxes and replace them with a carbon tax, a tax on bullets, a tax on sugar, and a small financial transaction tax. I want to get radically entrepreneurial over here to pay for the safety nets we're going to need over here. Unfortunately, in our current politics, if you're for stronger safety nets and trampolines, you're never for radical entrepreneurship. And if you're for radical entrepreneurship, you're never for stronger safety nets and trampolines. What would Mother Nature call that? Stupid, that's what she'd call it. Because Mother Nature would understand you cannot build resilience and propulsion against climate change unless you are utterly hybrid heterodox in your thinking in this way. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why all our parties are blowing up. Not only here, but in Europe. And for my money, they can't go fast enough, because none of them were designed for this world. They're all designed to answer questions of the New Deal, the Industrial Revolution, the early IT revolution, and civil rights, both race and gender. And I think the question you have to answer in the age of acceleration is how you build resilience and propulsion in the face of these three climate changes. Eventually, I think the parties will get there, and we are now in the transition. Let me close by talking about two areas that you wouldn't normally think about being relevant today in this age of acceleration, but they are vitally important. One is ethics, and the other is community, and they're related. So my chapter on ethics is called, Is God in Cyberspace? Is God in Cyberspace? Happens to come from the best question I ever got on book tour. 1999, I was in Portland, Oregon at the Portland Theater. I was selling a book called Lexus and the Olive Tree, my first book on globalization. A young man stood up in the balcony at question time and said, Mr. Friedman, I have a question. Is God in cyberspace? I said, I have no idea. And I felt like an idiot. So I came home, I called my spiritual teacher. He's a rabbi I got to know when I was the New York Times correspondent in Jerusalem. His name's Zvi Marks, a great Talmudic scholar at the Hartman Institute. He actually lives in Amsterdam now, married to a Dutch priest, interesting character, Zvi. And I tracked him down in Amsterdam, and I said, Zvi, I got a question I'd never had before. Is God in cyberspace? What should I have said? And he said, well, Tom, you know, in our faith tradition, we have two concepts of the Almighty. We have a biblical concept and a post-biblical concept. So the biblical concept says the Almighty is almighty. He smites evil and rewards good. And if that's your view of God, he sure isn't in cyberspace, which is full of pornography, gambling, cheating, lying, people smearing one another, bad talk, and now we know fake news, okay? But fortunately, he said, we have a post-biblical view of God. And the post-biblical view of God says God manifests himself by how we behave. So if we want God to be in cyberspace, we have to bring him there by how we behave there. Only we can bring God into cyberspace. I really liked his answer. I put it into the paperback edition of Lexus and the Olive Tree in 2000, where none of you read it, and it sat there for 17 years. So I sat down to write this book, and I found myself just unconsciously suddenly retelling that story. And I finally sat myself down and said, why are you retelling that story? And the answer immediately became clear to me. And it was for two reasons, and one just happened. One just happened last year. I think in 2016, in the developed world, was the year we started living 51% of our lives in cyberspace. That's where we're living our lives now. That's where we find a date, find a spouse, get a mortgage, buy a car, buy a book, write a book, get our news, generate our news, meet our family. We're now living 51% of our lives in cyberspace. And what's my definition of cyberspace? It's a realm where we're all connected and no one's in charge. There are no stoplights in cyberspace. No real rules of the road. No police, no courts, no 1-800, please stop Putin from hacking my election. But that's where we're living now, more than half of our lives. We're living more than half of our lives in a realm that is fundamentally God-free. And at the same time, because of these amplified powers of the age of acceleration of men, women, and machines, we're now standing at a moral intersection we have never stood at before as a human species. In 1945, we entered a world where one country could kill all of us, post-Hiroshima. If it had to be one country, I'm glad it was mine. I think today we're entering a world where one person can kill all of us, and all of us could actually fix everything. We've never been to this intersection before where one of us could kill all of us, and all of us, if we now put our minds to it, we actually have the tools to feed, house, clothe, and educate every person on the planet. We've never been here before where one of us could kill all of us, and all of us could fix everything. And what does that mean? We have never been more godlike as a species than we are today. Well, put those two together. We've never lived more of our lives in a realm that is God-free, and we have never been more God-like. And what does that mean? It means what everyone thinks, feels, and believes today matters more than ever. It means, at a minimum, everyone needs to be in the embrace of the golden rule. And every faith tradition has their version of it. Do unto others as you wish them to do unto you, because we now live in a planet where more people can do unto you farther, faster, deeper, cheaper than ever before. Putin did unto us in our election through Facebook. And we can now do unto others farther, faster, deeper, cheaper than ever before. Everyone needs to be in the embrace of sustainable values and, at a minimum, the golden rule. I know what you're thinking. I actually gave this part of my talk as the commencement address recently at Olin College of Engineering. And I told the parents there, I know what you're thinking. You paid $200,000 so your kid could get an engineering degree. And who do they bring in as the commencement speaker? But a guy advocating the golden rule. Is there anything more naive? And I will tell you what I told them. In the age of acceleration, naivete is the new realism. Because I'll tell you what's really naive. Thinking we're going to be okay when men, women, machine get this empowered and we are this interdependent if everyone isn't in the embrace of the golden rule. Where does the golden rule come from? Where do people learn the golden rule? Two places: strong families and healthy communities. That's where you learn to do unto others as you wish them to do unto you. I'm not an expert on strong families. I hope I built one, but I never presume to lecture anyone on that subject. But I actually am an expert on healthy communities because I grew up in one. A little town outside of Minneapolis called St. Louis Park. And that's why the book ends where I began, in the little town I grew up in. So the basic story was my grandparents emigrated to Minneapolis, Minnesota in the 20s from Eastern Europe. My parents were both born in Minnesota, and as was I. Basically, Minneapolis was the capital of anti-Semitism in the 30s and 40s in America until Hubert Humphrey became mayor of the city, a great hero in our house, had cleaned it out of city government. My parents couldn't join AAA. Golf clubs, neighborhoods were completely restricted. Anyways, so all the Jews actually lived in a ghetto in the north side of Minneapolis, called North Minneapolis, with African Americans, not because we were integrated there, because we were both isolated there. And after the war, in the mid-50s, I was born in 53, around 1956, the entire Jewish community, virtually the entire Jewish community of Minneapolis, moves out of the north side and all goes to one suburb called St. Louis Park, this little town outside of the city, the only one that didn't have restricted covenants and had enough housing stock to take them all. So my aunt and uncle moved one door down this way, 2 doors down this way, my other uncle moved 2 doors down that way. The entire Jewish community, basically in a 3-year period, moves to one town. And a town that had been 100% white, Protestant, Catholic, Scandinavian, overnight becomes 20% Jewish, about 80% white, Protestant, Catholic, Scandinavian. If Israel and Sweden had a baby, it would be St. Louis Park, okay? So I tell the story about how we all got to know each other and build a pretty remarkable, inclusive community. Because it was an interesting place. You see, I actually went to the same high school, Hebrew school, grew up in the same neighborhood at roughly the same time, 8-year period with the Coen brothers, Al Franken, Norm Ornstein, the political scientist, Michael Sandel, the political theorist, Alan Weisman, the National Book Award winner, Peggy Ornstein, the author, Mark Trestman, the coach of the Chicago Bears, Sharon Isbin, the guitarist. We all actually grew up in the same little town and went to the same Hebrew school and local school at roughly the same time. This was not a neighborhood in the Upper West Side of New York. This was a one high school town outside of Minneapolis in a place called St. Louis Park. The Coen Brothers movie, A Serious Man, was about our town. And if you saw No Country for Old Men, you remember a scene where Churga blows up a car outside of a pharmacy in Mexico in order to go in and steal drugs. At the end, the camera pans to the pharmacy. It's called Mike Sauce Drugs. That was our little St. Louis Park drugstore. So I tell the story about how this place infused us with an incredible civic ethic and how we built a community together. And there were broken dates and broken hearts and all the things you would expect. It wasn't always easy and it wasn't a straight line. But in the end, we built a pretty cool little community that propelled a lot of us into the world. It was our anchor and our sail. And it propelled a lot of us into the world with an incredibly powerful civic ethic. I took it into journalism, Franken took it into politics, the Coen brothers took it into film, Peggy Ornstein took it into literature, Sandel took it into political theory, but it had a, it had a huge impact on all of us. We, the little Jewish community, we called ourselves the Frozen Chosen. And we took this ethic into the world. This thing you have to have been to Minnesota to get this, but it's called Minnesota Nice. And hard to explain Minnesota Nice to people who haven't been there, but I give a couple of examples in the book. My friend Ken Greer his daughter was getting married at his home while I was working on the book to attend the wedding, and another friend of ours, Jay Goldberg, sat down with me and he said, Tom, my wife Eileen was driving in the ring road around Minneapolis today, 494, and a driver almost drove her off the road. And she came home and said, Jay, I was so mad I almost honked. Okay. That's Minnesota for road rage, okay? There was a Jewish mafia in Minnesota in the 30s and 40s, headed by a gangster named Kid Can. My dad actually grew up with these guys. I swear he wasn't in the mafia, but he did know them. And when I was 5 or 6, I couldn't remember exactly how old, but I never forgot what my dad said, because he came home one day and told me one of his friends had been arrested and sent to jail. And when you're a 5 or 6-year-old kid and your dad knows someone who's in jail, that just freaked me out. Which is why I never forgot when I asked my dad, Dad, what did he do? And he said, son, he was shopping in a store before it was open. That's Minnesota nice for breaking and entering. Anyways, I tell the whole story of our community and the effect it had on me, and now you know why I'm the moderate, why can't we all get along columnist at the New York Times. Anyways, I left St. Louis Park in 1971, and I came back 40 years later, basically, to write this book. And I found the world had discovered St. Louis Park. Now my high school is 50% white Protestant Catholic Scandinavian. It's still 10% Jewish. It's 10% Latino now, and 30% Somali. Somali and some African American, but mostly Somali. That's because the little town that took the Jews 40 years later took the Somalis. Now the inclusion challenge is so much deeper, so much wider, religiously and racially. And I tell the story about how they're doing. And it's a struggle, it's hard, it's not easy, but they're doing pretty well. My high school is still the 5th rated high school in the state of Minnesota with a completely different demographic, but it's hard, it's a struggle. But the reason I call myself still an optimist in the age of acceleration is not because everything is going perfectly. It's because I am struck in, I use my little town as the example, but there are so many other towns in America like this. It's not that we fixed all the problems, it's that I'm struck by the number of people who want to get caught trying. And that's what I find when I go home. My teacher and friend, Amory Lovins, who helped me with all the physics in this book, whenever people ask Amory, are you an optimist or a pessimist? Amory likes to say, I'm neither, because they're just two different forms of fatalism. Everything will be great, everything will be awful. Amory says, I believe in applied hope. I believe in applied hope. And I believe in applied hope because I have seen the number of people applying hope at the community level all across this country. If you want to be an optimist about America today, stand on your head. The country looks so much better from the bottom up than from the top down, okay? Not perfect at all. Lots of challenge, lots of struggling communities. But there are a lot more people applying hope than you'd ever imagine. And that's why my book and my talk ends with its theme song. My book has a theme song. I actually thought, could I buy this song? So when you open the book, it would play this song like a Hallmark card plays Happy Birthday. The song is from one of my favorite singers, Brandi Carlile. She's a great country folk singer. And the song is called I, E-Y-E. And I believe it is the anthem of our time. The main refrain is, I wrapped your love around me like a chain, but I never was afraid that it would die. You can dance in a hurricane, but only if you're standing in the eye. You see, my 3 accelerations, they're a hurricane. We have a president who's trying to build a wall against the hurricane, and a lot of political leaders. What I'm actually arguing for is building an eye that moves with the storm, draws energy from it, but creates a platform of dynamic stability. The healthy community where people can feel connected, protected, and respected. I think the great struggle in our politics going forward is going to be between the wall people and the I people. And my book is a manifesto for the I people. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. We have microphones, and we have time for some questions before you all buy hundreds of books and I sign them. Whoever has got the microphones, just go right ahead.
Thank you for this. I enjoyed it bigly.
Thank you.
But as you were presenting all of these hockey sticks, as a physician, I had an epiphany that there is another hockey stick which can be superimposed on all the hockey sticks that you just presented, and that is the opioid epidemic that we're going into now. And I would maintain that with the hockey stick that you showed, that we have a limit to the information that we can assimilate. And I think we're being crushed under that. It's
Thank you.
caused,
Yeah, I got the question. I want to give time for others, but I
caused great anxiety.
yeah.
And anxiety is pain, and we are treating that pain
With
opioids.
It's a very good question. Thank you very much. I actually, I wrote a new afterword for the paperback to address specifically that issue, and I think it's a really important one. I'm glad you raised it. So what I did was I took a car trip through Appalachia. And I realized everyone was writing about Appalachia, and I'd never been there, and I happened to get invited to give a lecture in Louisville and then in Oak Ridge, Tennessee at the National Lab, and I thought, I think I'm just going to get in a car and drive across Appalachia. But I did some research ahead of time. So I started my trip in a little town in southern Indiana, that's northern Appalachia, called Austin, Indiana. And I went there because the town has one doctor. And I went there because the town has 4,400 people and 5% of the town's HIV positive, which is sort of just the worst sub-Saharan African rates of epidemic, as you could imagine. Story of the town is really just what you said. 2 factories, one closed and the other got automated. A lot of white working class males basically got unemployed. They fell into opioid addiction. You had son, father, grandfather all shooting up together. I went to interview the one doctor in the town, Will Cook. And it's a terrible story, and it's going on in a lot of towns other than Austin, Indiana, we know, and I'm glad you brought it up, and there is a accelerating rate. But then what I did was I kept going on my trip. From Austin, I actually went 40 miles south on I-70. I hit Louisville. And Louisville actually has 30,000 open jobs. So if anyone's looking for a job, there's one for you in Louisville. So this is 40 minutes south of Austin. So I really was interested in that, so I spent time with the mayor, Greg Fisher, and I said, what's going on here? And Louisville has created what I call a complex adaptive coalition. So that actually comes from the natural world. Which organisms survive when the climate change best? Complex adaptive organisms. Which towns are surviving best? Those whose leadership come together and create complex adaptive coalitions. In the case of Louisville, you have the business community partnering intimately with the public school system, translating now in real time the skills, needs, and demands of the global economy so they can be taught in schools and community college. Then the philanthropic communities come together with supplemental learning opportunities, scholarships, internships, and after-school learning opportunities. And then the local government's catalyzing it and hiring recruiters to go out into the world to find global investors into Louisville's natural assets, not waiting for Ford Motor to come with a 25,000 person factory, because that factory is now 2,500 robots and 500 people, to invest in Louisville's assets. So what's going on in Louisville? Louisville has made itself today the capital of bourbon tourism. Louisville is to bourbon what Napa Valley is to red wine. Huge explosion of tourism around distilleries and bed and breakfasts, et cetera. Louisville happens to be the hub of UPS. So when Jeff Bezos promises you 24-hour delivery, the only way that happens is because when you fly into Louisville Airport now, all you see are factories as far as the eye can see. They're all end-of-runway manufacturer, servicers, and assemblers. That's how you get it in 24 hours. And Louisville is the actual headquarters of Humana, a giant wellness company. So the mayor started this whole wellness movement in the city. Every morning, young people go out with breathalyzers connected to the cloud, and they tell you exactly where the cleanest air in Louisville is to breathe that day for asthma users, et cetera, asthma sufferers, et cetera. So there's this image in the country that America is divided between 2 coasts. The 2 coasts are liberalizing, globalizing, modernizing, and pluralizing. And the rest of America, flyover America, is high on opioids, voted for Trump, and waiting for 1950. Well, you only have to be from flyover America to know that is not true. Our country's actually divided, in my view, between communities that are collapsing from the bottom out and communities that are rising from the bottom up. And some of them are right next door to each other. And the ones that are succeeding are those that have created these complex adaptive coalitions. Because that, I think, is the only answer Obviously, there are medical answers to the opioid epidemic, the pharma industry, all of that. That's beyond my skill set. But if we're going to deal with some of the causes of it, it's going to require these complex adaptive coalitions. And so the country today is actually a checkerboard of towns that are failing and towns that are rising from the bottom up. And if I were writing a tax bill right now, just for instance, I might be thinking about that rather than just sort of blindly cutting taxes and thinking, how do I enable this and encourage this and disenable that? That's my Mother Nature's political party. You know what I mean? So anyways, thanks for your question. Really appreciate it. Yeah.
In a way, you may have just touched on this, but you mentioned earlier that our political parties are in transition. Where do you see them evolving to, and how do you think that'll address the dislocation and alienation that a lot of folks have felt that have led them to become Trump voters?
Yeah. Well, it's a really, it's an important question. It's a $64,000, political question. So I think both parties are clearly one party thinks it's alive because it's in power, but if you look at them, they're as fractured as the Democrats. You got this Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders wing of Democrats, and Hillary Clinton and more centrist and conservative Democrats. You have the Steve Bannon Republicans, and you have the traditional northern liberal Republicans, and none of them actually can live with each other. But one happens to be in power, so it thinks it's alive. I think the 2020 election is going to blow them all up. I think that the 2020 election will be unlike any election we've ever had. Because I cannot imagine these two parties now agreeing on a candidate. Either one of them. So I have no idea what's going to happen. But we're going to have to go through this breakup in order to reconfigure the politics. Because there's a whole group of people in the country, I'm one of them, who have no representative in national politics right now. So there's going to be, I think, a great sorting out. So I was just in London last week. The same thing is going on in the UK. Look, we saw in France, their two leading parties got wiped out in one election, by Macron, who came out of nowhere. And so I think you're going to see it all happen in this election. And I just can't imagine what it's going to be like, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be unlike any election we've ever seen, because I don't see these two parties anymore being able to bridge their internal differences. And I think there's that George H.W. Bush and George W. Bush have a lot more in common today with Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama than they do with people in their own party. That's pretty clear. So I think we're in for an incredible resorting. And I hope Mother Nature is in the mix. I hope she runs. Yeah. I don't see the microphone, so who's ever got, please go ahead, yeah.
First, thank you so much for a terrific talk.
Appreciate it.
Your articles are phenomenal.
Thank you.
This is actually a serious question.
Please.
Although it may not come off as such. And that is, have you considered running for president, or would you consider running for president?
Thank you. Thanks, Dad. I didn't know you were here. God put me on this green earth to be a journalist, and I really love what I'm doing, and I get my aggravation playing golf, I don't think so, but who knows, let's see what 2020 brings. I'd much rather be the person who is out there reporting and researching and infusing, both the public and the political class with the right ideas. This book took me 3.5 years to write. What you just heard in 55 minutes is the distilled essence of 3.5 years. And I had to learn about a lot of different things, like all that technology stuff and Hadoop and all. I didn't know any of that, And then I had to spend time at the Resilience Institute in Stockholm to understand all the climate stuff and then the globalization stuff. And one of the frustrating things about politics as I follow it today is that politicians spend so much of their time raising money and just sort of voting on post offices or whatever they do, that nobody's learning. And in this age of acceleration, like if you're not learning like all the time, if you're as a politician not a lifelong learner, then you kind of get stuck with your lines or whatever, and the world just whooshes you by, And so I'd like to be out there. I think I can really serve my country best by trying to be always learning and sharing these ideas and hoping they infuse the political debate. But thank you very much for the question. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Somebody with a microphone? Oh, back there, yeah.
Hi, huge fan of your works.
Thank you.
I just had a small question, not really as big as
Go ahead.
else's, but did you ever follow up with the parking guy? Did you like see if it?
Oh, sure. It's a good question. Several people have done stories about the book and have called a Yile. I actually gave a talk at the Washington Hebrew Synagogue last Sunday, and I invited a Yile to come, and I introduced him to the whole audience, and we've remained friends. We talk, and he's someone I care about deeply, and he inspired this book in many ways, and in the process, I actually made him the most famous blogger in Ethiopia. So it's but we're very much in touch. I just had him out last week to come to a lecture, and he's someone very, very dear to me and very important. Thank you for asking. Yeah, up there. Please.
I think I speak on behalf of everybody here. What do we have to do to get you to start writing 2 columns a week again?
That's so nice of you to say. I'll just tell you something about my career, which is, I actually started fairly young, as a reporter. I read out of graduate school, when I was 24. They sent me off to Beirut. And I was under deadline then for 17 years as a reporter. And then I wrote 2 columns a week for 20 years. And I got a little tired, I will be honest with you. That's 40 years of deadlines. And the truth is, I find that writing once a week is actually better, because in the age of Trump is a brain-eating disease. So he will actually, he will make you stupid. It's a real challenge for columnists, because you end up, he sucks the oxygen out of every room. You end up writing about him all the time, and you're not learning. And I'm really cognizant of that. And what I love to do is I love to go places and learn things and share that with people. And if every week you're responding to the latest Trump, Sarah Huckabee Sanders outrage, you're actually not learning. You're playing his game, And so I find 1 column a week I can really focus better. If I have to write about him, I do, but I can really make sure I'm still learning. And I think my industry's got to be careful, because he can destroy a whole generation of columnists who will go 4 years of just writing about him and then look back and realize they didn't learn anything. That he kind of owned them. He sucked their brains out. And that's why. So, but thank you very much. I really appreciate that. Yeah. Yeah. Please. Go ahead. Oh,
over
there.
here.
Yeah, sorry. Oh, there.
Again, like everyone, thank you.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Question for you. On the graph that you showed, I think from the researcher from Google, where you had technologies not rising much faster than humans are learning.
Yeah.
Or not human, Americans are learning.
Humans, yeah.
With our Constitution, the way we're set up in the United States, which is based on distributed decision-making, which is a slow process, do we have the ability with the current Constitution to be able to keep up and bridge that gap that you showed?
It's a really, really good question, really relevant. And I get into this in the community chapter. So what I basically argue in the book is that in this age of acceleration, all national governments are just too slow now. They're paralyzed by partisanship, by interest groups and whatnot. They cannot keep up with these accelerations. At the same time, on the other extreme, the single family is too weak against such accelerating forces. That's why I argue it's the healthy community that is the right governing unit for the 21st century. If I were running for president, I'd be running as a progressive localist. I'd be running on a ticket that says, let's push as much authority and power down to the highest trust level, because government moves at the speed of trust. Again, Dove likes to say, trust is the only legal performance-enhancing drug. Okay? So where there's trust in the room, boy, people can go so fast. And where there's no trust in the room, nothing happens. In Washington, D.C. now, 0 trust. So nothing can happen in the face of these accelerations. And at the single family, they're 2 weeks. So I actually tell a little story about St. Louis Park. So in 2009, my little town decided they were going to be the first town in Minnesota to have free public Wi-Fi. Very St. Louis Park, okay? So they contract out, they end up paying $1.8 million to a firm in Annapolis who had this idea of solar-powered Wi-Fi towers all over St. Louis Park. They put them all, installed all of them in. The first winter, they all failed. The ice froze on the solar panels. Complete white elephant. And I was out there interviewing the town's mayor, the CTO who had a heart attack over this, Clint Perez, and the town manager. And Clint, the CTO, told me this story. They had a press conference one day and announced, we're taking this thing down. It was a failure. It was our fault. And after the press conference, Clint told me he went to the Harvest Moon Cafe near City Hall. And he walked in, and the first guy there said to him, "You're the Wi-Fi guy, aren't you?" And he said, "Yes, I am." And he said, "Too bad that failed. What are we going to try next?" That is the sound of trust. Now compare that, as I do in the book, to the Solyndra story. Remember that whole issue when Obama's invested money in a solar company, venture government money that failed, okay? And what do we do when that happens in Washington? What question do we ask? Life can we destroy? Whose career can we destroy? And how can I use this to hurt the other party? But in the community, the question was, I know you are trying your best. What are we going to do next? And in the age of acceleration, that's what we need. And that's why I'd be arguing, I'd be running to say, let's push as much authority down to the people trust their state government more than their federal government, and they trust their local government much more than their state government, and there's so much less politics at the local level. Because somebody's got to fix the sewers, somebody's got to plow the streets. And so that's really where I would be pushing everything. Not to more and more big government programs. I'm not a federalist, I'm a localist. Thank you. Yeah.
Since coming out with the book and sharing all this research, have any of our current leaders at any level of government or anywhere in the world reached out to better understand or adopt any of your proposals?
I just was invited last week. I spoke in the British Parliament for the British Council. And I've spoken to the Minnesota legislature, and I've spoken to different political groups around the country, but no one in Washington. Seriously, nobody, Not sure the book made it there, but I'm hoping they'll get the audio edition. We'll do one more question, then we'll sign book, because you people must have babysitters. So I don't know who has the microphone. Somebody have the microphone?
Up here.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah, please. Go ahead. Whoever has it. Okay. Upstairs, go ahead.
Oh, I'm honored. Thank you. It was a terrific talk, and I look forward to reading the book.
Thank you.
Would you comment on education? I don't know if it's covered in your book, but you made the comment about the woman who didn't complete her 4-year degree, and then through this incredible platform of matching skill sets with job opportunities, what that means for us as parents, and whether we should encourage our kids not to finish those college degrees when they come to us and they say, I really want to take some time off.
Yeah. I wish my daughter were here. My older daughter is the deputy headmaster of the Khan Academy Lab School in Silicon Valley. So she's the one you actually want to talk to, not me. She's really at the cutting edge. But what she really is working on in her school is really the issue of ownership, which is that your kid has to feel that he or she owns their own education now. Because they're going to have to keep owning it, refreshing it, and updating it through their whole life. I mean, that's really the key thing. And that's why I like so much what Heather says. It's not what you want to be, it's how you want to be. And if your kid is going to a school that is making them love learning and inspiring them to be a lifelong learner, they're in the right school. If you as a parent are encouraging that, you're doing the right kind of parenting thing. Because we're all going to have to learn, relearn, and retool just so much more often. And so, I don't know which school has the right mix anymore, charter, public, private, whatever. I'm always of the view that, the whole meta theme of this book, the reason it's called Thank You for Being Late is not only the opening anecdote. The theme of the book is that when the world gets fast, what really matters today are all the things that are old and slow. What really matters today are all the things you cannot download. What really matters today are all the things you actually have to upload the old-fashioned way. Good parent to good child, good teacher to good student, good government official to good citizen, good preacher to good flock. And all of that has to be done face-to-face. So if you're looking for me on Twitter, I'm not there. If you're looking for me on Facebook, I'm not there. I know who my friends are. They're not a thumb up or a thumb down. And anything said about me in 142 characters, I do not care about, okay? It's a sign of the apocalypse. I actually think they're all garbage, frankly. So I'm into old and slow stuff now. And I'm into all that old-fashioned stuff. You know, I'll leave you just with one story. I took the most remarkable trip, one of the most remarkable trips of my whole journalism career in August. The head of the US Air Force, Dave Goldfein, invited me to go with him on a trip to visit all our air bases in the Middle East. Afghanistan, Iraq, Kurdistan, Kuwait, Abu Dhabi, Qatar. It's just an amazing trip, just a little group with the Air Force. And a couple things happened on that trip. One was, so we were at Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar when Charlottesville happened. Actually, when Trump's press conference about Charlottesville happened. Now, when you're a column, just to go back to the gentleman's question there, you know, it's often tricky. Like, you're out in the Middle East, you're supposed to be writing about that, you've gone 10,000 miles, you know. But meanwhile, there's something going on back home that everyone's talking about. And so I was sort of sitting there thinking, what do I write about? And then I looked around at our little traveling party, and I realized I was traveling with the head of the US Air Force. He's of Jewish descent. We're traveling with the Air Force Secretary. She's a woman. Her executive officer is an African-American woman lieutenant colonel in the Air Force. Her guard's name was Juan. The head of the air war in the Middle East is an Armenian-American. His deputy was a Lebanese-American, and the intelligence briefer's name was Yang. Mr. Trump, which part of this sentence don't you understand? Okay. So you really got to see the genius of America, the beauty of America, and what actually makes us strong. But anyways, the next morning I was having breakfast, because we're staying in an air base, so we're living in barracks, and I was eating in the mess hall, and I got up for breakfast early, and I was just eating breakfast by myself, and 3 airwomen sat down at the table next to me, and I noticed one of them was saying grace, just very quietly to herself, over her cereal and fruit. And I was just watching her. It was a very peaceful pause, and just struck me as beautiful in its own way. And I came home, and 2 weeks later I went to Birmingham to speak to their community, their Complex Adaptive Coalition, and a friend of mine hosted a dinner for me with the mayor, who's African-American there, and a group of town leaders, and at his house. And before we ate, he said, I would like to say grace. And it was done in a very non-denominational way, you know, but really brought us together around the table. And I realized after 2 things. One is, I didn't know anyone who said grace in my life. And number 2, I'm really into saying grace now, okay? Because I think that the idea of the 2 things I saw of pausing, you don't download grace, you know? And the community building, I think we need it more than ever. So whatever you're teaching your kid, teach them to say grace too. Thank you very much.